The Galactic Empire had once called humanity its proudest ally and also its most unpredictable one because humans were fast learners and dreamers who never accepted limits, and this nature made them powerful but also dangerous. In the eyes of those who ruled the stars, Ambassador Claire Monroe stood in the Great Hall of the Galactic Council, where hundreds of alien delegates watched her in silence. She was calm but tired after years of trying to keep peace between Earth and the Empire. The council chambers were filled with soft light that shimmered against the high walls of glass and metal. Every member of the Empire believed their words could control worlds, yet the silence around Claire felt heavier than any weapon. She looked across the rows of faces and saw no friendship left, only judgment. Claire began to speak, her voice steady but heavy with the weight of too many broken promises. She reminded the council of the early days when humans had joined the stars with hope and trust. Back then, the Empire had praised them for their courage and creativity. Together, they had built cities on moons and stations near distant suns. But over time, the Empire changed. It became greedy and fearful. It saw humanity as a rival, not a partner. Laws were passed that limited human trade rights. Colonies were taxed unfairly. Human scientists were denied research access that they once shared freely. Claire listed each of these betrayals not to shame them, but to remind them of what was lost. She hoped they would understand. She hoped they would listen. But as she spoke, the faces of the council remained cold. No one wanted to hear the truth. Commander Ethan Brooks watched from his seat beside her, his hands folded tightly on the table. He was a soldier, not a diplomat, but he knew what was coming. He had seen how the Empire treated human fleets in the outer sectors. They were inspected, harassed, and sometimes attacked without reason. Yet every time they complained, the council said it was a misunderstanding. Ethan had fought wars before, but this felt worse because it was not fought with weapons but with pride and lies. He had known Claire for years and admired her strength. She still believed that reason could save them all. Ethan no longer did. When the session ended, Claire stood waiting for a response, but none came. Only the Emperor's advisor spoke a few cold words, saying that the Empire valued peace, but that humans must respect order. Order meant obedience. Claire lowered her gaze for a moment, then thanked the council and left the chamber. Outside the hall, Ethan followed her through the long corridor that led to the shuttle bay. He could see the tension in her shoulders. She finally turned to him and said she was tired of begging. Ethan nodded and told her it was time they accepted that the Empire would never see them as equals. Claire said softly that if they leave now, the galaxy will fall apart. Ethan replied that maybe it needed to fall before it could learn. They reached the shuttle where a small group of human officers waited. News of the failed meeting had already spread among them. The younger officers were angry, saying the Empire had crossed the line too many times. They spoke about independence, about leaving the council altogether. Claire listened, but said nothing. She looked out toward the stars visible beyond the hangar shield and wondered if humanity could survive alone again. Once Earth had feared the vastness of space. Now they had learned to master it. Maybe this was the time to walk away. Back on Earth, the mood was grim. The broadcast showed the Empire's official message, which claimed that humans had overreacted and that peace still stood. But no one believed it. People saw the truth in their daily lives. Trade ships were delayed. Supplies to colonies came late or not at all. The Empire had even begun to restrict access to shared communication networks. It was a silent punishment. Claire returned to Earth and met with the Terran Council in New Geneva, a city built after the last World War to represent unity. The council members were divided. Some wanted to stay and negotiate again. Others believed it was time to prepare for separation. Claire spoke calmly, saying that she still wanted peace, but not at the cost of dignity. Humanity must not kneel to anyone. Her words spread quickly across the world. For the first time in years, people began to think that maybe they were strong enough to stand alone. Ethan, meanwhile, worked with the military command. He was responsible for the outer defense network that protected human colonies near the border worlds. The reports he received every day showed the Empire's fleets moving closer to human space. Officially, they called it a security patrol. Unofficially, it was intimidation. Ethan ordered all stations to prepare for possible withdrawal. He told his officers not to provoke but to be ready. He had seen too many wars start by accident. In orbit above Earth, the largest human station, Horizon Prime, shone like a second moon. It was both a fortress and a symbol of unity. From its observation deck, Claire stood looking down at the blue planet she called home. She thought about how far they had come. Her grandparents had lived through a time when humanity almost destroyed itself. Then they rebuilt. Then they reached for the stars. And now they were being pushed away by those who feared what they had become. She closed her eyes and remembered her speech to the council. Every word she had spoken was true, but truth had no place among those who worshipped power. That night the Terran Council gathered again, this time behind closed doors. Ethan attended through a secure link from Horizon Prime. The debate was long and bitter. Finally, Claire spoke once more. She said that peace cannot exist without respect. The Empire no longer respected them, and no treaty could fix that. She proposed to begin preparations for a complete withdrawal from all Imperial systems within 1 year. Some called it madness. Others called it freedom. After hours of silence, the vote was taken. The result was close but clear. Humanity would leave the Galactic Empire. The decision sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The Empire dismissed it as a bluff. The media on dozens of worlds called it impossible. But deep down, everyone knew something had changed. The next morning, the first convoys began their long journey back to human territory. Ethan watched from the command deck as ships left the trade lanes one by one. No one fired a shot. No one said goodbye. It was as if a curtain had fallen between two worlds that would never meet again. Claire wrote one last message to the Emperor himself. It was short and simple. She thanked him for the years of cooperation and expressed regret that it had to end this way. She reminded him that peace is not built by power but by trust. Then she signed her name and sent it through the official channel. She never received a reply. As the days passed, more human colonies followed. The Empire tried to send envoys to convince them to stay, but none were allowed entry. Humanity was moving on. The stars that once marked the borders of the Empire now shone as a map of independence. The decision could not be undone. On Horizon Prime, Ethan met with Claire one last time before she returned to Earth. He told her that history would remember her words. Claire smiled sadly and said history remembers what it wants, but maybe someday they will understand. She looked out at the endless field of stars and whispered that it was too late to repair what was broken. Ethan agreed, and somewhere beyond the Empire's reach, humanity began to dream again, not of peace with others, but of a future they would shape by their own hands. The weeks after humanity's decision to leave the Galactic Empire were filled with both fear and quiet pride, because no one knew what would happen next. The Empire's leaders were still in shock, and many believed the humans would come back once they realized how hard it would be to survive alone. But they did not know humanity anymore. Across Earth and every colony, the people worked together with a focus that had not been seen in generations. There were no more speeches about compromise. Now there was only work. Claire Monroe returned to the capital city of New Geneva, where the Terran Council had made their headquarters. She spent her days in long meetings helping to organize the withdrawal from Imperial space. Every trade route had to be replaced, every agreement rewritten, every station restaffed. She moved like a woman who no longer had time for anger. Ethan Brooks, meanwhile, stayed in orbit, commanding the defense network that watched the borders. His ships escorted convoys home while monitoring the movements of the Empire's fleets. He had no illusions. He knew they were being watched. The Empire did not act at first. They waited. Emperor Valen and his advisors were sure that humanity would soon come begging for aid. Without Imperial trade and technology, they believed Earth would collapse within months. They were wrong. Human engineers quickly built replacements for what they lost. Old factories on Mars reopened. Mining colonies on the moons of Jupiter were expanded. Even the small settlements on Titan and Europa began to grow again. The people worked longer hours and sacrificed comfort for progress. There was something in them that had been missing for years. They called it purpose. Ethan often walked the halls of Horizon Prime at night, unable to sleep. He would stop at the large viewing window that looked down on Earth and think about what they were building. The stars beyond seemed endless, and he wondered if that was freedom or loneliness. Sometimes he thought of Claire and her calm, steady voice during the last council meeting. She had stood alone in front of beings who saw humanity as a problem, and she had not flinched. He respected her more than anyone he had ever known. One morning, the first signs of trouble began. A convoy carrying food and supplies from the colony world of Haven reported being intercepted by Imperial patrols. The Imperial commander claimed they were checking for contraband, but the humans saw it as harassment. Ethan ordered his ships to escort the convoy safely back to human territory. The encounter ended without a fight, but the message was clear. The Empire was not ready to let them go peacefully. Claire was summoned to a private meeting with the Terran Council to discuss the situation. The room was filled with tension. Some wanted to confront the Empire directly and others urged caution. Claire listened quietly before speaking. She said that the Empire still believed they could control humans with fear. They were testing their resolve. If humanity showed weakness now, the Empire would never stop. Her voice was calm but firm. The Council agreed that no human ships would enter Imperial space again, and all future trade would be done independently. The line was drawn. As weeks turned into months, the separation became real. Communications with Imperial worlds grew less frequent. Trade partners once loyal to the Empire began contacting the Terran Federation for new agreements. Humanity's reputation for innovation spread fast. They built new engines that used less fuel and new methods of farming that turned barren worlds into green ones. The Empire watched this with growing concern. They sent spies disguised as traders to learn how humans were advancing so quickly. Some were caught and sent back with warnings. Others disappeared into the stars and were never seen again. Ethan spent his days inspecting the new fleets being built in orbit. They were not warships, but strong enough to defend their borders. He met young captains eager to prove themselves and old veterans who had fought for peace but now believed it was time to stand alone. One evening, he stood on the bridge of the ship Horizon's Light and spoke to his officers. He told them that their mission was not to fight but to protect. They were not leaving the Empire to start another war. They were leaving to find peace on their own terms. The crew nodded in silence because they all understood. Far away in the Imperial capital, the council members argued over what to do. Some said they should crush the humans now before they became too strong. Others warned that such an act would divide the Empire. Emperor Valen listened but said nothing for a long time. Finally, he said that humans were reckless but also useful. They had always been innovators. Without them, the Empire was already losing efficiency. Reports from several sectors confirmed that production was slowing down. He realized too late how dependent they had become on human creativity, yet his pride would not allow him to admit it. He ordered the council to continue monitoring but not to attack. He believed they would eventually come crawling back. Back on Earth, Claire worked to create the framework of a new alliance not of dominance but of equality. She met with envoys from smaller civilizations that had long been under Imperial control. These species had suffered quietly for centuries, and now they saw in humanity a symbol of hope. Claire welcomed them carefully, promising cooperation and mutual respect. It was the beginning of something new, something the Empire could never understand. One night, Claire received a message from Ethan. He said the Empire had started moving fleets closer to the border again. He asked if she believed they would attack. Claire replied that she did not think so, at least not yet. The Empire was still trying to understand what had happened. They were proud and afraid at the same time. Ethan said that fear made them dangerous. Claire agreed. She knew the Empire would rather destroy than accept weakness. She told him to stay ready. Time passed and humanity's independence became undeniable. New colonies were formed beyond the edge of known space. They named them Freedom Reach and New Horizon and Solace. These worlds were simple but full of promise. Families moved there with nothing but hope and determination. Ethan often received reports of new settlements and smiled because it reminded him of the old stories of pioneers on Earth's frontier. Humanity was doing it again, reaching beyond limits. The Empire, meanwhile, grew restless. Discontent spread among its member species who had once admired the humans. They began to question why the Empire could not change as the humans had. Protests started on several worlds demanding fair treatment. The Emperor blamed humanity for spreading rebellion. He declared that the humans were a threat to galactic stability. But deep down, even he knew that the truth was different. The humans had simply shown everyone what freedom looked like. One quiet evening, Claire and Ethan met again on Horizon Prime. They stood together looking out into the black sea of space. Claire said she sometimes wondered if they had done the right thing. Ethan said it was never wrong to choose dignity. She nodded and said maybe one day even the Empire would see that. The stars beyond them shone like a promise. Humanity had walked away not in anger but in hope. But the Empire did not understand hope. It only understood power, and that misunderstanding would shape the future in ways none of them could yet imagine. The silence between humanity and the Galactic Empire grew heavier with each passing day. because words no longer had meaning between them. The Empire still pretended that it was in control, sending messages filled with empty threats, while its fleets shadowed the borders. But humanity did not respond. They were too busy building their own path. On the surface of Earth, the great cities glowed with new life as old industries were reborn. The people had accepted the hard road of independence, and now there was a kind of quiet pride in every corner of the planet. Claire Monroe worked day and night guiding the diplomatic corps that was forming new relations beyond the Empire's reach. Every day new faces arrived from small worlds seeking to join the Terran Federation and to escape the Empire's shadow. Claire welcomed them all with patience and warmth. She believed that building trust again would be humanity's greatest victory. Ethan Brooks, meanwhile, commanded the outer defense line near the colony of Haven. The station there orbited a golden world rich with resources and surrounded by human settlements that had grown fast in the last year. He watched over them with vigilance. Reports of Imperial patrols crossing close to the border had become common, but so far no shots had been fired. Ethan knew the Empire was waiting for a reason to act. He had trained his crews to avoid provocation, but also to be ready for anything. The new Terran fleets were smaller than the Imperial ones, but they were faster and built with human ingenuity. Each ship was a symbol of defiance. In the capital of the Empire, Emperor Valen was losing patience. The Council had assured him that the humans would collapse within months, but now reports showed the opposite. Trade routes once controlled by the Empire were being replaced by new human alliances. Sectors that once depended on Imperial guidance were now looking toward the Terran Federation for leadership. Valen felt his empire slipping through his fingers like sand. He ordered his generals to find a way to remind the humans of their place. Some of them warned against it, saying the humans had become too strong, too united, but Valen would not listen. He believed that strength must be shown before respect could return. On Horizon Prime, Claire received intelligence from one of the Federation scouts. They had detected unusual movement near the border system of Nira. An Imperial fleet of 20 ships was gathering there, claiming it was for exercises. Ethan was informed and immediately dispatched a group of reconnaissance ships to observe. The images they sent back confirmed his fears. The Empire was preparing for a show of force. He called a meeting of his officers and told them to keep calm. They would not be the ones to start another war. But deep inside, he knew the Empire might not care who fired first. As tension grew, the people of the Federation watched with mixed feelings. Some were afraid that leaving the Empire would lead to destruction. Others believed it was the final test of freedom. Claire appeared on the public broadcast and spoke directly to the citizens. Her voice was calm and clear. She told them that peace was not given, it was earned and sometimes defended. She asked for unity and patience. The message spread through every colony and world. People began volunteering for civil defense and donating resources to strengthen the Federation. The feeling of being part of something greater than themselves filled the air. For the first time in centuries, humanity was not divided by politics or greed, but united by purpose. At the same time, Ethan faced difficult choices. His officers wanted to reinforce the Nira sector, but doing so could provoke the Empire. He sent a message to Claire asking for guidance. She replied that he must trust his judgment. He understood what she meant. Humanity could not live in fear forever. The next day he ordered 2 fleets to move into a defensive position near the border, but instructed them to avoid any act that could be seen as aggression. The crews obeyed with quiet determination. They knew that the future of millions might depend on their restraint. In the Imperial fleet, Admiral Serene was in command of the operation near Nira. She had served the Empire for decades and had little respect for humans. To her, they were impulsive and dangerous. Yet even she was uneasy about the Emperor's orders. She had seen the reports of human advancements, and she knew they were no longer the weak partners they once were. Her second officer told her that their presence might provoke a response. She said that was the point. The Emperor wanted the humans to fear them again. She sighed, knowing that fear could easily turn to fire. The inevitable moment came when a human cargo ship named the Pioneer strayed too close to the border. It was carrying food and medicine to a new colony. The Imperial fleet intercepted it, demanding inspection. The human captain refused and tried to turn back. Admiral Serene ordered a warning shot to be fired, but one of her inexperienced gunners misjudged the range, and the blast struck the Pioneer's rear engines. The explosion lit up the void. In seconds, the human ship was crippled. Emergency signals filled the channels. Ethan's command received the distress call and he froze for a second before ordering all nearby ships to assist. The Empire claimed it was an accident, but the damage was done. Claire was in a meeting when the report came. She closed her eyes as the officer read the details. 23 civilians were dead and dozens injured. The Terran Council erupted in outrage. Some demanded immediate retaliation, but Claire spoke over the noise, telling them that they must not let anger rule them. She said they would seek justice, but not revenge. She sent a direct message to Emperor Valen demanding a formal apology and full compensation. Days passed and no response came. The silence was more insulting than any word. The Empire still believed they could act without consequence. Ethan visited the wreck of the Pioneer once it was brought back to Haven. He walked through the shattered corridors where fire had blackened the walls. Personal belongings floated in the air held by the station's low gravity. He found a small child's drawing pinned to a panel showing a family standing under two suns. He folded it gently and kept it in his pocket. When he returned to his ship, he looked out into space and swore to himself that he would never let this happen again. The attack changed everything. Across the Federation, anger turned to resolve. Factories doubled production. Volunteers joined the fleet. Scientists accelerated research on new defensive systems. The unity that had been built through hope was now hardened by loss. Claire saw it and felt both pride and sadness. She knew that humanity would endure, but she wished it did not have to be through pain. She continued to send messages to the Empire, but none were answered. The Emperor had chosen silence, and silence had chosen war. As months went by, the Empire's economy began to suffer. Without human cooperation and technology, their systems grew slower, and their people restless. On several Imperial worlds, protests began to rise. Citizens demanded that the Emperor restore relations with the humans. Valen ignored them. He still believed he could force humanity back under his control. But each day that passed made that dream fade further away. The Federation was no longer a small group of colonies. It was becoming a power on its own. One night, Ethan received a secure message from Claire. She told him that whatever came next, they must remember why they left. They had not left to conquer or to destroy. They had left to be free. He promised her he would never forget that. The next morning, he stood before his crew and told them that history had chosen them for a hard task. They must stand strong but never lose their humanity. The crew saluted him with quiet respect. In their hearts, they knew that the road ahead would be long and painful, but also full of promise. And somewhere deep in space beyond the reach of any empire, a small blue planet called Earth continued to shine like a beacon of hope for all who dared to be free. The Empire had begun to understand, slowly, that humanity could not be controlled because every act of intimidation had only strengthened their resolve, and every attempt to delay them had only made them smarter and more united. Claire Monroe walked through the council halls of New Geneva each day with papers in her hands and a mind full of plans, because the Federation was growing fast and each new colony needed guidance and protection. She met with envoys from distant stars who had heard of human courage and ingenuity and wanted to be part of something new. Claire welcomed them and promised safety and fair treatment. This was something the Empire had never done and would never understand. Ethan Brooks spent long hours aboard Horizon Prime reviewing reports from the fleets near the borders. Every day, ships returned from scouting missions with news of Imperial movements or the discovery of new star systems that could become human settlements. Ethan met with his officers and reminded them that their mission was to protect, not to attack unless absolutely necessary. Yet in his mind, he prepared for any scenario because the Empire was unpredictable and dangerous. Human engineers on the station were constantly working on new defensive technologies to keep the fleets ready. On Earth, life had changed in a quiet but important way. People were no longer looking for help from outside. Factories hummed with production, and scientists worked together on projects that had once been impossible. Agriculture expanded to planets that had been considered uninhabitable, and medicine improved in colonies far from Earth. Humans had learned to depend on themselves and to trust each other. The sense of pride was palpable. For the first time in centuries, humanity truly believed it could survive without the Empire. In the Imperial capital, Emperor Valen sat alone in his chamber. Reports came daily that the human colonies were thriving, despite the lack of support from Imperial systems. Production was increasing. New alliances were forming. Technology advanced at a rate he could not match. For the first time, he realized the danger of underestimating humans. He summoned the council, but few could offer advice because none had experienced humanity's ingenuity firsthand. Valen felt fear, though he did not admit it. His pride would not allow it. He believed humans would still need him. He was wrong. One morning, a new threat appeared when a small fleet of independent traders reported being harassed by Imperial patrols. The traders had been negotiating with the Federation to sell resources to human colonies. Ethan received the report and immediately sent a fleet to escort them safely. The Imperial commanders claimed they were acting within their rights, but the humans knew better. Each encounter like this strengthened the Federation's reputation and weakened the Empire's authority. Claire called a meeting with the Council to discuss these events. The room was filled with tension. Some members suggested responding with force, but Claire reminded them that they were stronger than the Empire wanted them to be, and that strength did not mean recklessness. They could not let anger guide them. Instead, she proposed reinforcing diplomatic ties with neighboring species and establishing new supply lines independent of Imperial control. The Council agreed and work began immediately. Ethan monitored the construction of new defense stations along the border systems. Each station was designed to provide security without provoking conflict. His officers trained crews for emergency scenarios, but always under strict rules of engagement. He also established rapid response teams to protect convoys carrying supplies to outer colonies. Every step was measured because any mistake could trigger a war. Yet the humans were calm and disciplined. The Empire, meanwhile, grew restless. Citizens of various species under Imperial rule began to notice humanity's success and questioned why the Empire could not achieve the same. Protests started in some systems demanding reform and fair treatment. Emperor Valen saw these reports and blamed humanity for inspiring unrest. He ordered increased patrols and stricter regulations, but his actions only confirmed the Empire's weakness in the eyes of their people. Claire monitored these events and knew that the Empire's fear of losing control would eventually make them reckless. One evening, Claire received news of a new settlement that had been established at the edge of explored space. Families had moved there with little more than hope and determination. Ethan's team had provided protection for the journey, and the colony was already thriving. Claire spoke to the settlers over the communication network, reminding them of the Federation's principles and promising support. The people cheered. For them, this was freedom. For the Empire, it was a growing problem. As months passed, the Federation expanded rapidly. Ships carrying supplies, settlers, and diplomats traveled between colonies safely. Claire worked tirelessly to maintain communication and cooperation between all members. She visited new worlds to witness progress firsthand. Each colony had its own culture and governance, but all shared the same respect for freedom and cooperation. Humans had built not just new worlds, but a new way of living. Ethan continued to patrol the borders, reporting any unusual activity from the Empire. He knew that one day there might be an open conflict, but for now humanity's best weapon was patience and preparation. He met with his officers and engineers, constantly discussing improvements in defenses and logistics. Every ship that left Horizon Prime carried hope and determination. Every crew member knew that their role was not just military, but also a symbol of what humanity had become. The Empire's attempts to regain control continued, but failed. Each effort was carefully watched and countered by human intelligence. Emperor Valen realized that the humans were not just leaving. They were creating a new power beyond his influence. The Council debated endlessly on how to respond. Some feared outright war. Others suggested leaving humanity alone. Valen could not decide. In the meantime, the Federation grew stronger, faster, and more respected by smaller civilizations across the galaxy. Claire and Ethan met again on Horizon Prime, overlooking the stars. She spoke quietly about the responsibility they bore. Every choice they made could affect millions. Ethan nodded and said that humanity had already proven it could survive and thrive without the Empire. Claire smiled slightly and said that was the point. They were free and nothing could take that away. For the first time, she felt a sense of calm. The future was uncertain, but it belonged to those who were brave enough to shape it. Time went on and humanity's growth continued. New settlements flourished. Trade networks expanded. Defense systems were ready. Diplomacy was maintained with care. The Empire could watch, but it could not stop them. The Federation became a beacon of hope for oppressed species. Claire and Ethan knew that their work was not finished. There would be challenges, perhaps conflicts, but humanity had learned to rely on itself, and that made it strong beyond measure. And somewhere beyond the stars, the Empire slowly realized that it had lost more than territory. It had lost respect. It had lost trust, and it had lost the chance to hold on to humanity ever again. The years passed, and humanity had grown stronger beyond the reach of the Galactic Empire, because every day they learned new ways to survive and thrive on their own. Claire Monroe continued her work leading the Terran Federation. She moved between colonies and settlements, ensuring that new worlds were integrated into the alliance with care and respect. Each colony had its own way of living, yet all followed the same principles of freedom and cooperation. Claire watched young leaders take responsibility with courage she had once seen only in soldiers and scientists. Humanity had become more than a single planet. It was a network of worlds united by choice and hope. Ethan Brooks continued to command the fleets along the borders. His ships patrolled quietly and efficiently. No one provoked anyone, but every crew member knew their job was vital. The Empire still sent messages demanding compliance, but they were ignored. The humans did not need permission to exist or prosper. Reports from the outer sectors confirmed that new trade routes had been established, and the colonies were self-sufficient. Every day that passed proved that leaving the Empire had been the right choice. On Earth, the cities had grown taller and wider. Technology was advancing faster than ever before. Engineers had developed engines that could travel farther and faster, while consuming less energy. Farms on Mars and the moons of Jupiter produced enough to feed every settlement. Medicine improved to the point that illnesses that had once been deadly were now treatable even in the farthest colonies. Claire walked through one of the research centers on Earth and saw children learning alongside scientists, eager to understand the universe. She smiled quietly, knowing that the next generation would carry humanity even further than she had imagined. In the imperial capital, Emperor Valen was growing frustrated. His council had failed to find a way to bring humanity back under control. Attempts at diplomacy had been ignored, and acts of intimidation had not worked. Worse, reports indicated that human influence was spreading to other civilizations that had been under imperial rule. These species began to ask for fair treatment and equality. Valen realized too late that he had underestimated the humans. They had not just left, they had created a power that could not be stopped. He tried to prepare for retaliation, but even his generals warned him that it was too late. The humans were already beyond the reach of the Empire. Back on Horizon Prime, Ethan watched as a convoy returned from one of the newest colonies. Families and settlers were happy and healthy. Their ships carried resources and goods that had been produced independently. Ethan felt a sense of pride in the people under his protection. They had endured hardship, threats, and intimidation, and they had not bowed. Each convoy that returned safely was a message to the Empire. Humanity was no longer dependent on them. Claire held a meeting with leaders from all major colonies of the Federation. They discussed infrastructure, trade, and defense. Every decision was made with the consent of the people involved. There were no empires, no forced laws, only cooperation and respect. She reminded them that the Empire still watched and feared what humanity had become. Their unity, ingenuity, and discipline had made them a model for civilizations who had long been oppressed. One evening, Claire received a report of a distant planet called Solara that had just joined the Federation. Its people had struggled under imperial control for centuries. They had waited for someone to show them that independence was possible. When humans arrived and offered assistance and friendship, the citizens of Solara embraced it fully. Claire felt a deep satisfaction knowing that freedom could spread not by conquest but by example. Ethan received reports from the fleets near the farthest colonies. Every encounter with remnants of the Empire was managed with caution. Patrols that once might have caused fear now encountered confidence. The humans were calm, prepared, and alert. The ships were faster and more maneuverable than Imperial fleets, and crews had perfected their coordination. Each engagement, though minimal, demonstrated to the Empire that humans could defend themselves without firing unnecessarily. The Empire grew desperate. Valen called a council to discuss the situation. He demanded action to bring humanity back into line, but none of his advisors could offer a solution. They had relied on humans for centuries, and now they were gone. Plans for coercion or subversion failed because humans had prepared for every possibility. Valen realized the cost of arrogance and pride. He had thought humanity would always need him, but now he saw that they needed no one. Claire and Ethan met on Horizon Prime one last time, before a major journey to the outermost colonies. Claire looked at the stars and said quietly that they had done it. Humanity had become independent and strong. Ethan nodded and added that no empire could take that away. They both knew that the work was not finished, but also that they had achieved something remarkable. The Federation was no longer a collection of planets. It was a symbol of what humanity could become when they worked together. As the fleets moved toward new colonies, humanity spread its influence gently yet firmly. Other civilizations saw what was possible and began seeking guidance. Humans provided advice, protection, and support without domination. Their reputation grew as a civilization that built, taught, and defended rather than conquered. The Empire could watch from afar but could no longer interfere. Every human settlement became a testament to determination and unity. Years later, the Empire looked on as humanity continued to thrive beyond their reach. Valen grew old and his advisors had dwindled. The citizens of the Empire who once mocked or feared humanity began to wonder if they had lost the chance to achieve greatness. They had relied on humans for technology, trade, and guidance. Now those tools had been taken away by their own arrogance. Claire and Ethan watched from Horizon Prime as new ships left for undiscovered worlds. Humans were explorers, builders, and guardians of freedom. They had left the Empire behind not in anger but in purpose. The galaxy would never be the same because of them. On the bridge of the flagship, Ethan looked at Claire and said quietly that the Empire had thought they could control humans. Claire smiled and said that it had been too late before they even realized it. The stars stretched out endlessly before them, and for the first time humanity was free not just in name, but in action. Every colony, every fleet, and every citizen knew it. They had left not to fight, not to dominate, but to exist on their own terms. And that existence would shape the future of the galaxy. The Empire had watched, had feared, and had failed. Humanity had departed, and nothing would ever bring them back under control. They were beyond reach and stronger for it. The galaxy had learned the lesson too late, and humanity moved forward, together and unstoppable.